the Triathlon Show 320. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of that Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Coach Brenton Ford. Brenton is a swim coach based in Australia, and he's the founder of Effortless Swimming that I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about, seen their YouTube videos, or listened to their podcast. Brenton was previously on that Triathlon Show all the way back in episode 18, and then we mostly talked about open water swimming, but today we dive deep into technique and technique development, specifically in the context of age group triathletes who are somewhat time restricted when it comes to the swim training they can do. We also discuss things like video analysis and general training structure, how to improve your swim fitness, and plenty of other bits and pieces. But before we get into the interview, big thanks to our sponsors. First, we have Precision Fuel and Hydration. Precision Fuel and Hydration have a range of tools and products to help you personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so that you can perform at your best. Regular listeners of the show will know them as Precision Hydration, but they have changed their name to reflect the fact that they have been helping athletes with hydration and nutrition for a long time now and have products in both of these categories. Everyone sweats at a different rate and need individualized hydration and sodium intake strategies, and also fueling strategies need to be individualized because they depend on factors such as duration and intensity of the activity. So a one-size-fits-all approach to fueling and hydration doesn't cut it. Head to precisionfuelandhydration.com and use their free online sweat test and quick carb calculator to understand your fluid, electrolyte, and carbohydrate needs during training and racing, and book a free one-to-one video consultation with the team to refine your strategy. As a listener of the show, you can get 15% off your first order of fueling and hydration products with the code TTS22 at checkout at precisionfuelandhydration.com. And thank you to Roka. Roka produce exceptional quality triathlon wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, performance sunglasses, and prescription eyeglasses and sunglasses. If you want to go faster in the water or on the bike, then consider getting a Roka wetsuit or tri-suit. But for today, let's talk a little bit more about Roka's performance sunglasses. Roka's performance sunglasses are made for advanced performance even in the most extreme conditions. They are unbelievably lightweight, have amazing optics, and they cannot fall off your face thanks to the patented Geeko anti-slip technology. Personally, I love the Matador model, but you can choose between a number of different models to find the pair that fits your preferences and requirements the most, both in terms of function and style. Visit roka.com/TTS for 20% off your entire order. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Coach Brenton Ford. Welcome back to That Triathlon Show, Brenton. How are you doing?
Good, thanks, Michael. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. You were one of the very early guests of the podcast back in episode 18 or so, I believe. So that's been 3-4 years almost. So for the many new listeners that we have since then, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Brenton Ford. I run a swimming coaching company called Effortless Swimming, and we specialize in helping triathletes improve their swimming technique. So I started this business about 12 years ago, and over that time I've worked with 6,000 or 7,000 different swimmers with underwater filming and video analysis, and I've really just focused on what can we do to help triathletes and swimmers get faster, understand technique, and make those changes over a couple of months or a couple of years. So that's been my specialty for the last couple of years. And prior to that, I was a competitive swimmer, so I made a few national age finals as a junior. And then I coached a master swimming club, which is an adult swimming club here in Australia, for about 8 years, and took them to 5 national club championships. And after that, I sort of went full time with the business, and now we run a lot of clinics around Australia, coach a lot of people online, and also when we can, we run camps overseas too. So my life is 90% swimming, and I love swimming. I love coaching and really working with adults to improve their technique. So I'm glad I get to do what I do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And you've also done an Ironman yourself, I know. And was that because you wanted to see what swimming in the context of triathlon is like? You did Ironman New Zealand, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. I call myself a one-hit wonder when it comes to triathlon. I did one season where I did an Olympic distance, a half, and a full. And I was booked in to do Ironman Melbourne, and that was the last year that they ran it. So I ended up cancelling it. So I had to book in, and I did New Zealand over in Taupo. And I wanted to do it just to tick it off the bucket list because it was something that I wanted to do since I had a lot of friends in the sport, and also just to see what's that experience like. And I found it helped immensely when it came to coaching others, just to understand what does your body go through when you're doing so many hours on the bike and on the run. Does it actually impact your swim? And obviously it does. So for me, it was a good experience just from a coaching point of view as well. But I found it really fun. I loved training for it. I loved being that fit. And maybe down the track when the kids are a bit older, I might get back into it. So wait and see.
Yeah. So the first question that I want to ask you on the topic of swimming for triathlon is, can you describe, or in your opinion, what limits swim performance for age group triathletes and how to overcome that? So you talked a lot about technique, but here we can get into perhaps when it is technique, when it might be fitness, and all of the kind of nuances and points on the spectrum in between.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a triathlete, you're limited with the amount of time you can put into the swim because you've got two other sports to train for. So time's probably the number one limiting factor. And so for a lot of people, that might be 3 or 4 hours a week that they can swim. So in that time period, you need to make the most of the limited amount of time you've got in the water. So time's number one. The second one can be fatigue as well. So when you are training for those other sports, you might come off the bike or off the run pretty fatigued in the legs and maybe not feeling that great when you get into the pool. So sometimes you need to adjust your training to account for that, and just make sure you are still getting some sort of intensity into your training. The other thing can be mobility. Personally, I found when I started doing triathlon, I came from a swimming background. My mobility was really good. And then as soon as I was spending several hours on the bike and in this hunched over position, and I was running as well, I just found generally I got a lot tighter through the shoulders. My thoracic spine or thoracic mobility was limited too. So I found a bit of an impact there. I couldn't rotate as well. I couldn't recover over the top of the water as easily. So there's mobility limitations there too. And it's not to say you can't overcome them, but I think it just takes a little bit of managing some of those things as well. The other thing too is obviously open water swimming can be quite different to pool swimming, and learning how to swim in the open water well is different to swimming well in the pool. And it's one of the challenges that I have when I'm working with people is that normally we want to try to get them to swim well in the pool first, just understand some of the concepts, the main concepts around technique and what's important. Then when they're comfortable with that, we sort of build into taking that kind of stroke, but perhaps with a couple of changes into the open water. So it's different than coaching just a traditional swimmer. I know when I first started coaching, I came from the understanding that everyone knows how to swim, and if you ask them to make a change, they should just be able to do it. But that was just me as a naive young coach. Whereas a lot of people don't know some of the fundamentals of swimming, so sometimes you have to start with the basics. And but triathlon swimming is very different than your traditional pool swimming. So for me, it took probably 4 or 5 years to really understand that. And when I finally understand it, I think it made me a much better coach. And for the athletes I was coaching, it made a big difference. But I think that's a mistake that a lot of swim coaches have when they're working with triathletes, is they're trying to teach them to be a swimmer and not a triathlon swimmer.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I actually had that very specific discussion with an athlete yesterday when discussing things like squad swims and so on, and things to just keep an eye out for and be mindful of. Then, yeah, on the balance of technique and fitness, so what's your opinion there? Are more of the athletes that maybe there is a bit of a bias there because you're, as you mentioned, you're kind of a a business that focuses a lot on the technique aspects and doing video analysis and things. But just in general, do you have an opinion on whether most age groupers are more limited technically, or whether for a lot of them it's actually just swimming more and then everything will sort itself out once you get a bit more specific swim fitness? What's your take on the balance there?
Yeah, aerobically, most of the triathletes I work with, they're really good. Aerobically, they're very fit. So it's not a matter of increasing their aerobic fitness because it's just so strong from the other two sports. And this is general terms, of course, but for many of them, it is technical, provided that they're doing 3 sessions a week in the pool. So if you're doing 2 sessions a week, you probably need to really pick it up to 3 to see some benefit. And obviously 4 is better if you can, but minimum sort of 3 to really see some good improvement. So if they're doing 3 and they've got some well-structured sets that has got them perhaps changing pace as they go through it, working the different zones and mixing things up a bit rather than just swimming 2K straight every session, which we see with some new triathletes. And I was speaking to a guy this morning who's was doing 1,500 or 2K straight, and he was doing it as a time trial every swim every session he did. And that can work to a certain point, but you're going to be limited with what you can achieve after that, because you talk to any top triathlete, any top swimmer, their sets involve warm up, main set, and that's got intervals of 100, 200, and so on. And there's different paces and efforts and all that sort of stuff. So making sure you've got some good workouts there, which as a coach, you know what that looks like. And then after that, I think a lot of the times it comes down to technique. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased there, but I think it's such a major factor. And then open water skills and the ability to race well too. So that's really, the main things that people can do to see an improvement if they've got the basics of doing the sessions, having some good workouts. It's often the technique that's holding them back after that.
Yeah, no, that makes all sense. So let's get into a discussion on technique and how to improve your technique. Perhaps, I don't know where you want to start. If you want to take this in a slightly different direction, that's okay. But I know you've been talking about on your podcast and your YouTube about 5 core principles for technique in freestyle swimming. So maybe that's a good place to start with discussing your views on what is good freestyle technique for triathletes.
Yeah, absolutely. And before that, I think something that's important to know as well is that any changes that you make to your stroke is it's going to take time. So when I'm working with people face to face, I let them know what to expect up front. So everyone's different with what they need to work on. And when you're making changes and making them correctly, people are different. That some people will get faster, some people will stay the same, and some people will actually get slower, even if they're doing the right thing initially. It just depends on what you're changing. And for me, when I started coaching, I thought any change you make should immediately make you faster. And that's a misconception, because that sometimes you'll be using different muscles and muscle groups, so it's going to take a little bit of strength and time. It's going to take time to develop that. And it's a motor pattern that you might have had for several years. That's all your technique is. It's this muscle memory you've got. And so it takes typically 6 to 8 weeks to be able to change that, sometimes longer. And so you often are not going to make these changes and get it right every stroke. You might get it right 1 stroke out of 4. Then we just want to build up the consistency there. So when people are patient and they're not trying to force these changes, I find that's when they typically do best, because if we're relaxed and we're calm when we're swimming, we tend to swim faster and we move better. So those people that are wanting to just get immediate improvement straight away, then they often don't swim as well because they're just trying to force it. So it's just, I think, having the attitude of I'm just happy being sort of where I'm at, and as long as I focus on the technique for the next 6 to 8 weeks, then I will see the changes. Because I often get emails 2 or 3 months after a clinic or with working with someone where they're like, nothing was happening for a long time, then all of a sudden it clicked, and then I could take 5 or 10 or 15 seconds off my 100, but it felt like nothing was happening for a while. But it just takes time to develop it. So I think that's an important thing, because otherwise people don't stick with the changes long enough.
Yeah, great preamble, and great kind of warning for the users, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And a coach that I've worked with is a ex-Olympian from New Zealand. He talks about the pit of discomfort, that when you make any sort of changes, it's going to feel uncomfortable and awkward more times than not. And so that's a sign that you're actually making a change. And then it's not until that new motor pattern's established that it actually feels good. So when I'm working with people at clinics, I'll let them know, like, don't worry if it feels like, yes, that, all right, my stroke's feeling better, or if it feels like you've completely forgotten how to swim. At least you've changed something, because that's our goal. It should be, you might feel some discomfort there, and that's a good thing. So that's what's important going into it. And then in terms of the stroke, I've found it was typically this order that I'd go through in my mind when I was analysing technique with people. And you've probably done the same when you're thinking of, you're watching someone, you're looking to improve their stroke. It's like, we don't immediately go to the catch and pull. We might look at their breathing to start with, and then their alignment and a couple of other things. So for me, I found it was helpful to write down these 5 core principles, because usually for people, we want to go through the stroke in that order. And so for me, it was, initially the first thing we want to look at is their breathing and relaxation, because if you're panicked, you're short of breath, then everything else is going to go out the window. So that's the very first thing that we like to look at. And there's so much that can go into your breathing. Like, I had like someone who works with breathing with people on our podcast, and there's just so much that I didn't know. Like, I've looked into this, studied it quite a bit the last 2 or 3 years, and with your breathing, like, it's the only part of your autonomic nervous system that you've actually got control of. So our stress response, to perhaps being on the start line or having someone swim over the top of us, the only thing we can actually control is with our stress response is our breathing. So if we can get that under control and we can learn to breathe better, then that's a huge part of not only swimming, but I think, but life as well. So that's something that, that we do like to look at first. After that, we often sort of look at balance. So we want to find our balance, which is pretty much your body position, which is the first way that you can swim faster, which is to minimize drag. So we look at, is there something causing their balance to be thrown off? And as you know, head position is a big one, but there's also a lot of other factors, such as how people enter and the depth of their hand and their kick, and how they hold their body and their posture. The third principle, we look at alignment. So that's kind of what the hands are doing out the front. We also look at the recovery and the entry there. And then the fourth one's the catch and pull. And then the last one is the rhythm and the timing, putting it all together, which is like the dancing part of swimming. It's just where everything goes into sync. So that's the structure. And if for those that are listening, if you look up 5 core principles, effortless swimming, we've got those listed on our website, and you can read more about them there. But if you are either like looking at your own videos and wondering, what do I start with? Those 5 core principles could be a good way to go.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Having some sort of checklist that you go through to make sure that you cover all the bases when analyzing, whether it's swim technique or something else. That's really useful. And do you find that any one of these that they are kind of, that more people have problems with one of these than with others, or is it fairly evenly spread across the demographic of swimmers that you work with?
I'd say the more beginner they are, probably the earlier the principle they need to work on. So more beginner, it's often breathing or balance. A little bit more experienced, sometimes it's the alignment, rotation, recovery. And then for the more experienced, often it's changes to the catch and pull or the rhythm and timing of things that they need to work on. That said, obviously it goes across the board, but that seems to be the way for those that are new. It's often core principle 1 or 2. So it just depends where you are with your swimming in terms of where you might really look to start. But I've found also those that are pretty experienced, they still pick up things in when they focus on their breathing or focus on their balance, because there's always these little things that we can change and improve. So I found it to work well for pretty much all level of triathlete.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Next, I would like to discuss the concept of a high elbow with you. That's something that you show really well, I think, in some of your YouTube videos when you're analyzing strokes. So can you explain a little bit what you consider what a high elbow means to you, basically.
Yeah, there's so much confusion around the term high elbow, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. Coaches often talk about a high elbow recovery, which is when your arm comes over the top of the water. So that can sometimes get confused with a high elbow catch, which is what's happening under the water. So first of all, with a high elbow recovery, that's often just referred to as you kind of need the elbow coming over the water somewhat, with a bit of clearance, as opposed to the elbow keeping really low. But what we're talking about here is the high elbow catch. And when I first heard this term as a swimmer back as a teenager, I thought that meant elbow near the surface. So you should keep your elbow really close to the surface because that's what a high elbow is. And I found when I did that, it felt kind of awkward, but I thought, okay, well, all right, I'll just keep trying it. But it never really sort of worked well for me when I tried to do that. And when I started coaching, I obviously looked into it and I did a lot of filming with people. And the high elbow catch is really it's the position we want swimmers to get towards when their fingertips are pointing down. So I know it's a podcast, so it's hard to convey this visually, but the start of the catch I consider to be when you're on your side, one arm's fully extended out the front. So when you're at full reach, I consider that to be the start of the catch. Then when your hand and forearm moves downwards to when the fingertips first start pointing down, that's about where the end of your catch is. And in that position, we want to get this high elbow catch. And the way that I would define it would be if we were looking side on at you in that position, if we drew a line from your shoulder to your fingertips, if the elbow was above that line, that's a high elbow. So it's a better term for it can be like elbow forwards position, because obviously a dropped elbow is when the elbow is sort of pointing to the bottom of the pool. So you can think of it like a elbow forwards position. Now, sometimes when people think of this, and
that line, just to make it very clear, would be a straight line, a diagonal from the shoulder to the fingertips. It wouldn't be a squiggly line that follows the shape of the arm, but the whole point of it is that it's a straight line, and then once your elbow is in that kind of higher or more forward position, then it would be it would be above that diagonal, and that would be kind of that would be the sign that you're having a higher elbow, high-ish elbow.
Yeah, and that's and so that position it's important because then our hand and forearm is angled to press back a lot better than if the hand and forearm is facing downwards, because pressing down doesn't do much to move you forwards. And often coaches will use this term early vertical forearm, but to me it's made sense, but it's very hard to achieve. And I think it can lead to the idea that you need to get your hand and forearm at 90 degrees, like really, really vertical to be swimming well. And that can really cause you to go to some uncomfortable positions with your stroke. So I've filmed a lot of really good triathletes, really good swimmers, and a bunch of them, I'd say close to the majority of them actually, are only just in this high elbow position. They're not looking like Michael Phelps with this 90-degree catch that's really extreme, because like most of us as adults and they're not training 10 sessions a week and super flexible, we don't have that range through the shoulders. So there's no need to go to this extreme position because it's awkward, it's not sustainable, and you're probably not going to get that in the open water anyway. So when I'm coaching people, I like them to get to these pretty extreme positions in the drills just to get an awareness and feel for it. But when they swim, they don't need to do that. So that's a high elbow as best as I can explain on a podcast. But it's something it's really important. And the best way I've found to improve that position for most adults is with some drills breaking down that aspect of the stroke, because it can be very hard to just, let's say, hear me talk about the catch and then just try and change it in their stroke without actually breaking down that movement. And so if you can do that with some drills, that gives you lots of time, lots of space just to be able to improve it and make those changes on their own, then you can start to build that up to the full stroke. So what we normally suggest for people is we'll give them like a couple of different drill progressions and do that as part of your warm-up every time you swim. And that's going to start that process. It's going to get that ball rolling to improve your catch, because it's about consistency if you want to change your technique. It's not about doing an hour of drills once a fortnight, because that's not going to do a thing for you really. And and we've seen really good results because like I work with people online. They'll send me their videos and I'll analyze them on a kind of weekly basis. But also with people who come to clinics, we do follow-ups, and they might come 2 months or 3 months later and do that every couple of months. And it's awesome to see that progression of those people who I've seen once, and then they'll practice the drills, come back 2 months later, and we can see that change in their catch. And when they follow it, it's really obvious how well you can improve that really important part of the stroke.
What are a couple of drills that you would suggest to improve that part of the stroke?
Yeah, there's normally 2 different types of progression. So one that we came up with a couple of years ago that we use in clinics, it's called the Ymca drill progression. On our YouTube channel, if you look up Ymca drill, Effortless Swimming, it'll come up. And this is just where you move your arms through the 4 key positions in the stroke. And that's been really good at just breaking down the important parts of the catch and pull. So that's quite a good one. The other couple of drills that we like to do, we call it slow doggy scoop, which is like a dog paddle type drill with your arms just out the front, and it's just where you're moving through the catch, coming back out the front. What do you call that one?
Yeah, I would call it doggy paddle.
Doggy paddle, yeah. So I'm a big fan of that one. There's another one that we call catch kick. It's just where you're kicking on your side with your arm in that high elbow catch, and again, it's just building that awareness for that position. And another drill that's similar to that, it's like a combination of the 2. So you're on your side, one arm out the front, and you're just going through that doggy paddle or dog scoop motion. And that can be good too. So people respond differently to different drills. So I like them to try a couple, see which ones work for them, and then use those in their program. And the other thing that I found really helpful when you think of your catch and pull is that from the start of the stroke to the back of the stroke, should be slow to fast. So it's not like you're turning the pedals on a bike at a constant speed. It should be slower out the front. So from the reach to the catch, you're going to move slightly slower through that part of the stroke. Then you'll accelerate and speed up a bit out the back. So movements in swimming are slow to fast. And that plays in really well to the next point, which is your catch is more the setup phase, not the power phase. So often when people come to me and they're trying to go faster, we see them rip really hard in the catch. They try and get all their speed, all their power in the very first part. But the thing is, through the catch, it's an overhead motion, or movement. So you're not very strong through that overhead movement. And secondly, if you just go for broke at the start, you're only pressing down on the water. You're not set up to press back. So if you think of your catch as more of a setup motion to then apply a bit more power and accelerate through it, you tend to find you have a better catch, you hold more water, and it's a lot easier and it's faster as well. So they're 2 things that I find really can make a difference for people if they are going about it a different way.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's definitely not the first time we have discussed that on the podcast with going from slow to fast. But the way you broke it down there, the reasons for why, I think honestly that's the best explanation I've ever heard for why it makes so much sense to do it that way. So kudos for that. That was a great explanation. Then on the technique side, still staying on that, do you think, are there any common kind of myths or misconceptions or mistakes that you see people do or hear about that you would like to point out and maybe give a different view on?
Yeah. One thing that I see a lot, and this is not necessarily a particular technique or common issue with freestyle, but I find that people tend to jump around a lot with what they're working on, and they might see a certain way of swimming and then completely change their stroke to fit in with this type of swimming. So, and look, with the videos that we do on YouTube, which I post videos pretty regularly, and I'm talking about different parts of the stroke, it might be good for 20% of the people watching. It might be something that they need to work on, but for the other 80%, it might be irrelevant. So it's good to, I think, if you can get some sort of like filming done or some sort of coaching from someone, maybe get 2 or 3 things to actually work on that's specific to you, and then just turn off all the noise, shut off all the noise and focus only on those, because it's very easy to get distracted, even from an Instagram video or listening to me talk here. But when you actually have something specific to work on that's relevant for you, that's when you really see some some big changes. Not that it doesn't help. People do get ideas from watching different videos and stuff, but it is easy to get distracted. The other thing is obviously with the stroke, one of the main ones can be the alignment, which is so common. If you go to a public pool and you look at 10 people swimming, you'll probably see at least half of them are crossing over out the front. So when the hand enters, it crosses the center line. So with a lot of the swimmers I work with, I say to them, if you can get on what we call the train tracks. So if you imagine you've got tracks that run in line with your ears, every time your hand enters and you reach forward, you want to follow that track. So we call that swimming on train tracks. And if people can get on those train tracks, if they are crossing over, it can iron out a lot of the other issues that we see throughout the stroke. So that's a really big one. And the thing about that part of the stroke is they've often got to exaggerate it to the point that they think they're going way too wide, that it's got to be completely incorrect. Like our proprioception in front of our head is very poor for most people. And that's not anyone's fault. That's just what it is. And even me personally, I've swum for a long time, but my proprioception out the front's really poor. So sometimes when we're making these changes, we've just got to exaggerate them to the point that we think this surely can't be right. And when you do that, then you normally have made the change. So for that one, for example, if you are crossing over or you're not sure, look forward and see what your hands are doing when you're. If they are crossing over, then you can adjust it with that visual feedback in front of you just by looking up occasionally. So that's the good thing about crossing over. You can change it and get that immediate feedback. After that, I think like the catch in the pool, to me, that's the 20% of the stroke that can make 80% of the difference. So I have a big focus on that with the swimmers I work with. And that aside from that, we sometimes look at things like posture and what the kick is doing. So a helpful thing with posture is that if you have poor posture when you swim, so you're rounded through the shoulders and hunched over, then you don't end up using your lats, your lower traps, your rhomboids very well compared to if you have good posture. So like if you were standing up straight like a soldier to attention almost, that's a similar sort of posture that we want. And the difference with that is huge, because we'll get swimmers going through this exercise at clinics where they'll partner up, they'll put one person put their hand on top of the other person's up at shoulder height. We'll get them to hunch their shoulders and then push down as hard as they can. And then we'll get them to go to good posture, up straight, chest out, shoulders back, but still relaxed, push down as hard as they can. And it's usually twice the power that they've got just because they're using their back and shoulders in a better way. They're using the bigger muscles through there. And so that's a good way to highlight, just swimming with good posture can make a huge difference for someone who might be swimming with poor posture. And look, probably a quarter to a fifth of the swimmers that I see are swimming with poor posture. But for those that are and then they change it, it's night and day between the two positions.
Yeah, no, there's some excellent points. And since you mentioned that the catch and pull might be the 20% that makes 80% of the difference, I just want to ask you as well about the pull through. We already mentioned accelerating through it, the stroke going from slower to faster. But other than that, are there any other tips for things one can do to improve the pull through, or just common mistakes in that area to avoid?
Yeah, there's a couple. So one is through the catch and pull, we want to try and keep the fingers pointing to the bottom of the pool. They can come off to the side a little bit, but not too much. So sometimes we will see swimmers when they've gone through their catch, they're about to pass under their shoulder. Sometimes they'll let their fingers point directly to the side of the pool. And we find that leads to a poorer catch position. They don't hold as much water. So keep the fingers pointing down. When you finish at the back, try and keep your palm facing behind you pretty much all the way. It will turn into the side of the body just towards the very end, but keep the palm facing behind you the whole way through the stroke. It just makes you have more surface area when you're pressing back. Sometimes swimmers I call it take the easy option. So their palm will turn into their body from once they're almost at their belly button all the way back to their hip. So it's like they're slicing out the back, and they just lose so much propulsion out the back there. So that's an important one. And the other one too is when they do finish out the back, just make sure you press back just past your hip. A lot of swimmers that I work with end up being very short. They're coming out before the hip, and then they're losing up to 20% of their overall distance per stroke just because they're finishing really short. And so I was working with a guy on the weekend actually who it was really big. Well, it was a really sort of simple change that he had to make, but it made a huge difference. So he was stuck at 145 per 100 pace for his sets and for his races. And when we looked at him, he was swimming so short. Both hands were coming out well before the hip. There was no reach and extension out the front. So he was just a lot of turnover, a lot of effort. And he said he was doing that because he was swimming with athletes that were doing 130s. And so I think for him he was originally like 2-minute pace. So for him to get down to that 145, he just turned his rating up and got through it that way. But he was stuck at this 145. And then what we had to do was just work on a bit more length out the front. So get him to actually reach and rotate out in front of him before he pulled through and finish off further out the back. And when he made that change, like he was able to do it pretty easily once he actually saw what the problem was. And it looked so much better. And I didn't check his stroke count or anything, but just looking at it, it was a much longer stroke. And I've got no doubt that that's going to get him down to that 130 that he was sort of aiming for. So, there's a couple obvious ones that often that we see when we're filming people.
Yeah, those are some really good points as well. Now, let's jump a little bit here because we're talking about technique. So I want to get to the video analysis part of the questions here. And I mean, we've kind of discussed around this already, but if you just put it down into a short and concise answer, what is the value of having a video analysis done for your swim technique?
Yeah, it helps you see exactly what you're doing in the water, and what you think you're doing is probably very different than what you're actually doing. So if you can close that gap, then that's the first step to actually changing your stroke, because I'd say there's probably 10% of people that I work with that are swimming how they thought they were swimming. And so it's just a real eye-opener. And for many people, they're afraid to get the video analysis because they don't want to see it. They know it's going to be bad, or they're embarrassed with how they look or how they swim. But to me, it's just like ripping off a Band-Aid. Painful at first, but then that's when the healing begins. That's when it can actually get better. So it can be a big step for people to get that done, or have a coach look at them, or even just looking at their own video. But it is worthwhile to do. There's nothing better than that for swimming, I reckon.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with that. And you mentioned there both the options of having a coach help you with it or doing it yourself. What would you say are the pros and cons of each of those options?
Yeah, I've had a number of people who have looked at their own video, and if the things that they need to change are obvious, they can certainly pick up some things and work on those. Particularly things like a crossover, which is really obvious. Sometimes if they're lifting their head when they breathe, that's quite obvious too. So you can certainly go a long way with just seeing your own video if you know what to look for. And people that have watched some of our Feedback Friday videos on YouTube, they get a pretty good understanding of what they're going for. But I think a coach can really help you break it down in terms of what should you work on first, and they can really be a lot more granular with the analysis. So often I'll get sent videos and people are like, I can see something's wrong, but I don't know what I'm looking for. And someone who's done a lot of coaching, done a lot of video analysis, they'll be able to see it. It'd be really clear. And then they can give you a little bit of a plan going forwards, because like we're talking about with the 5 core principles, if you try and work on your catch, but you're rotating too far and your breathing's off, then you're probably not going to be able to change it, or you'll be limited with it. So a coach can just help you, give you that structure on where to start.
Yeah, totally. And one thing that I would add as well is that there's a learning curve to taking good videos of yourself, especially the underwater part of it. So you can just shortcut that by having somebody who's done a lot of video analysis help you with that. But that being said, if somebody wants to do it on their own, what angles of video would you recommend that somebody gets for their own footage?
The two main ones, if it's underwater, is just swimming towards the camera and swimming side on. And normally when you're recording side on, you need to be 2 or 3 lanes across in order to see it fully. So with the GoPro, if you're too close to it, you're not going to see much of what's happening. So just make sure it's far enough away. And I often get the question, how do I record myself? Well, if they use something like a flexible tripod, like a Gorilla Pod, or just something with bendy legs, and you can attach your GoPro or your phone to one of these, then you can put it on the bottom of the pool or attach it to the lane line and wrap the legs around there. So there's, a GoPro and a Gorilla Pod or a flexible tripod's really helpful. And if you're a coach and you're looking to film, well, we use an extendable. It's almost like a selfie stick, but it's for a GoPro, and I think it's like a 36-inch extendable stick with the GoPro, and then we can follow people along the pool. We get the side view under the water, side view above. We get the bird's eye view, so looking from on top, and then the front view as well. And if we got enough time, we'll try and get like diagonal view under the water as well, looking towards the swimmer. Have you filmed yourself before? Have you used stuff to?
Yeah. So what you say there about the coach being able to follow, that's, in my opinion, one of the other biggest advantages of having somebody else film you, whether it's a coach or just a friend, that you get a longer section of actually seeing yourself in the side view in particular. But what I do when I film myself, I have a suction cup for my GoPro, which you can just attach to the wall of the pool, and then you see yourself when you swim past it, or you can attach it to the short end of the pool and when you swim towards it. So you get. So the suction cup is another option in addition to the Gorilla Pod. But yeah, I think I agree. Like when you have somebody, if you can team up with a friend and get one of those longer sticks to attach your GoPro, or the best option, of course, being to see a coach. But if you can get somebody else, then you get a lot more out of that, because you can get these other views, and you can get a longer section at each view. I do find that it's a little bit tricky to analyze yourself with just the kind of 3 or 4 strokes that you see in that frame when the GoPro is stationary.
Yeah, definitely agree. Like and sometimes you need a couple of strokes to really get a sense of it. Like if you can record, let's say it's like 8 to 10 strokes for half a lap and it's on the side, and then you can just roll through it in slow motion with maybe an analysis app, or even slow motion on your phone or the GoPro app. Like you can then get a much better understanding of what's going on all the way through it. So I think some's better than none, but if you can get it done well, it's like, wow, okay, this is what I'm doing, and now I know what I need to change.
Yeah. And speaking of apps, well, what apps do you like using when analyzing videos?
Yes, we use 2. Coach's Eye is quite good if you're analyzing your own video or a couple of friends. We use one called Skillest, which is actually a golfing app. But for what we do with lots of people at clinics, that's how we generally will analyze them. And
what was it called? Skills or?
Yeah, it's called Skillest, Skillest. Okay. And it's a golf coaching app, but they say golfing's a lot like swimming, so it's good for what we do with our clinics. And but it's either of those two, just depending on the situation.
Got it. And in terms of frequency of video analysis, what do you think is a good frequency to do it?
Yeah, I'd say minimum every 3 months would be kind of the least you'd want to look at your stroke. When I'm working with people with our stroke analysis coaching, I'll usually get them to send a video every week, at least in the beginning, because that's when we're working on more things, and then it will often spread out to maybe every 2 or 3 or 4 weeks after that. But initially, every week, and obviously that's not an option for a lot of people. They might not have that opportunity. But if you do have your own camera, I'll often get them to focus on 1 or 2 things in that first analysis, and then we'll check it in a week's time once they've had a chance to practice it, and then make corrections from there. So I think the more regular you can do it, the better. And that way you can stay on top of the changes, because sometimes you might think you're making a change, but nothing's changing at all. So if you can be consistent with it, get that fairly immediate feedback, it's going to help you shortcut that time it takes to be swimming better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so then let's move on to discussing some of the kind of fitness side of swim training, and how and when to do that. So let's say we're talking about a very well-rounded age group triathlete, and they're already working on technique. They're incorporating that. They're getting some quite reasonably regular video to improve their stroke technique as well. But how would you, for example, structure a week of, let's say, 3 swims, as you mentioned, as the kind of minimum in broad strokes in terms of what they're working on in those different sessions?
I like to usually have, if it was three sessions a week, it would depend on the person, but generally we'll have one threshold variable pace session, one aerobic longer session, and then depending on where they're at, we might have maybe another threshold session, or we might do some speed and some skills work for that third one. But I'd say if they're just doing 3, we'd probably go 2 threshold and variable pace, 1 aerobic, because if they're training for a half Ironman or an Ironman, we want to make the most of those 3 swims a week. And so for me, like an aerobic session might be a bit longer. Let's say it was 4 or 5K, for example, and some of that might be with pull buoy, paddles. We're just looking to hold a fairly steady pace, but just get a bit more distance in the arms. And then the other 2 sessions with the threshold and variable pace, it's looking to, if you go by like CSS pace or critical swim speed, if that's something that you're used to as a marker, it's often working off that sort of pace. But we're basically like looking to be working reasonably hard within that session and be getting down close to race pace, maybe just above it, and changing speeds as we're going through it. So those other 2 sessions are often pretty reasonably hard, but I think it's important. So I've had a couple of athletes on the podcast, and they like professional triathletes, and one of them was talking about, like, for him, he swims 3 times a week and he's usually front pack, and he says in those 3 swims he wants to feel like his arms are going to fall off. So he's doing like 5 to 6K each one, and they're all pretty hard. So by the end, he's pretty cooked by the end of it. That's obviously not best for everyone, but I get the idea where you want to make sure you're actually doing something in those 3 swims, if that's all you can fit into the week.
Yeah. And when you incorporate the variable pace in threshold sets, can you explain that a little bit more? So are you working from something, if you use CSS as a marker, for example, something that is a little bit slower than CSS to something that's a little bit faster than CSS, and then just alternating through, or how? What would an example set be?
Yeah. So either starting a bit slower than CSS and getting to a bit quicker than that. I like to go off perceived effort. To me, that's a really good way to develop your skills as a swimmer, to be able to know how fast can I go for the speed that I'm going to get as a result, and what can I hold for a race. So with perceived effort, like a set, for example, that the squad that I swim with, that we've been doing recently, is we'll go 800, and look, this is when you're pretty fit and maybe towards the tail end of your racing season. But so we were going 800 at 70%, then we go 4 100s at 85%, and I would consider that to be, like, let's say it's your CSS pace. Then we went 600 at 80%, then we did the 4 100s at 85, and then we did 400 at 90%, and then the 4 100s at 85% again. So with the longer intervals, we were just getting quicker as we went, and then holding steady for the 4 1s. So I found that to be a really good one. But and the thing about perceived effort is that it's going to be different for the different distances you're doing. So the 85% 100s are actually going to be a bit faster than the 400 at 90%, because your 90% for 400 is going to be different than 90% for 100. So it's just the perceived effort for that interval alone. Yeah. So that's the difference there. It's not like 90% of your CSS sort of thing. So just making sure that people understand that concept. But I'm a big fan of perceived effort, because you can get really good at finding the right pace when you race, which is I know is a challenge for people who are new to the sport. So those sort of sets can help. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I haven't prescribed anything based on CSS in a good couple of years, I think. Well, it's all perceived effort, and I tend to use quite a bit of just verbal cues like threshold effort or endurance effort, and race pace. Race efforts like Ironman effort would be a pretty steady aerobic, but not slow aerobic. Have 7.3 effort. Olympic effort is kind of the same as 7.3 effort, so I don't tend to use both of them too much, but it tends to be 7.3 to Olympic effort would also be kind of a threshold effort for me, and then sprint distance effort would be more of a VO2
effort almost, or close to a VO2 effort anyway for the faster swimmers. So I'm with you there. And then let's see here. So one thing that I would like to ask as well is what are the differences for the very advanced swimmers, or quite advanced swimmers anyway, compared to the more beginner swimmers, but still assuming that we are working on technique already and we're taking that into account. Are there any differences in the types of sets? I mean, of course, things like distance and paces will be different, but do you feel that the same kind of general structure of the week can be quite similar between different levels of swimmers?
It can be. I think if someone comes from a swimming background, they can usually roll through their sessions without needing to do a whole lot sort of thing. Like sometimes if people have got that swimming background, they can get away with just doing the swims and perhaps taking it a bit easier, or just making sure they have some sort of swim fitness. That said, not that you want them to do that. You obviously want them to do the sessions to the best of their ability, but I think for you can certainly give them similar sessions, but I think for someone who doesn't come from that swimming background, it takes a while to learn how to push yourself in the pool and push yourself in the water. So the sets that they do, I think it is important to make sure that they track their speed throughout a session, because many of the beginners or early stage swimmers, they're not looking at the clock. They might not be tracking their pace on their watch or in their form goggles when they're swimming. So you might ask them, like, what's your best 400? They might not know, or they might just be doing a set of 10 100s and they're not looking at what each interval is. And so while the workouts can be the same, I think just knowing what to focus on and what the real goals of the session are is probably the most important thing there. And I think a good coach will explain that and help them understand what's important for the workout. Because when you go from getting in the water, swimming 2K straight, going as hard as you can, to then actually having some well-structured sessions and knowing what pace you're trying to hit, and then going about that, that's when you often see the better results in the races, when people become that type of swimmer.
Yeah, no, those are all good points. I tend to find that, especially with the longer intervals, the newer swimmers, the more beginner swimmers, they kind of, one thing might be just the pacing is difficult, but also just remembering to focus on pushing yourself, if that is the goal of the session, becomes more difficult. So I like to give shorter intervals even when working on the same thing for the more beginner swimmers. So if we're doing a threshold set, then maybe I would like to have my advanced swimmers do more like 300s and 400s, but for the beginners, it might be more like 100s, and just to make sure that they can stay focused and keep pushing through those, and then get a little mental reset after each one.
Yeah, I think that's perfect, isn't it? Because with that lesser distance, they not only get the physical rest, but I think mentally as well, they can switch off a little bit, and then you can switch back on, and that's when they can sustain their technique throughout the whole session. With let's say an 800 interval to begin with, it's probably going to fall apart towards the end. So I think that's a great approach.
Yeah. And then finally on this topic, so with regard to volume, when, again, let's say that we're limited to 3 swims per week, how do you view the volume there? Do you look at that in terms of the distance or the time? Because obviously a faster swimmer will cover more distance in the same time. So do you like all of those 3 swims to be at least an hour, or do you have any sort of guidelines around the volume that we get into each session?
Yeah, as you said, it's going to be the slower swimmers will take longer to do a 3 or a 4K set. So minimum, we usually want the session to be an hour. I think that's probably the least you'd want it to be if you're doing 3 swims a week. So yeah, going by that, usually going a bit more by time spent, and also for people who might be working, they might have kids. It's they might only have that 1 hour to 90-minute slot in their calendar. So while the sessions that I will typically write will be, we're looking to achieve a roughly a certain distance. I'm not fixated on the amount of distance that people do each week, because you could do 10K of rubbish swimming where you're just floating up and down, or you could do 8K where there's good structure, you're changing pace, you're hitting your times. So I'm not concerned necessarily with the distance that people do. When we're looking at distance, primarily that's with people who are looking to train for longer swimming based events, like a 10 or a 20K swim, where we want to look at the volume that they're doing each week and managing that and building it up. So I'm not overly fixated on that with many of the athletes or the triathletes that I'd coach. Where do you lie on that?
I'm kind of the same. I take into account the athlete's speed in the pool, and then I have an idea that, okay, for this swim, I wanted to swim an hour, and then I plan the distance and the set according to that. And then if it's an hour and a half, then I plan the distance differently. I do think that what you say there with an hour as the minimum, I think that's a very important point, because one thing that I see, let's say when starting working with an athlete and the swim is a problem for them or a weakness for them, one of the reasons, as I think we kind of alluded to it, is often just not swimming enough. And it might be that they have the intention to do 3 swims per week and 3 1-hour swims per week, but then they actually end up doing 2 40 to 45 minute swims, and then they miss the third one because life gets in the way, and that means that they get an hour 20, an hour 30 minutes of swimming instead of 3 hours of swimming, and that's a massive difference, obviously, if you get an hour and a half of swimming each week rather than 3 hours of swimming each week. So I think that's a great point. And I do with swimmers that are, or athletes that are at least quite relatively ambitious and have high goals, I like them to get in at least one swim per week that is an hour 15. But quite often with athletes that have the time, I like them to do one 90-minute swim per week at least.
Yeah, I think that's great, and that's that longer aerobic session that I mentioned earlier. I think that's the one where you want to try and get up to 90 minutes, and it's I think people look at it, let's say they've just started triathlon or they've been doing it half a year or so. People look at an hour swimming and initially think that means I've actually got to swim for an entire hour, but when you break it down with a set, and it's broken down well by a coach with a good warm up, and then the main set's interesting, and it might sort of follow a nice pattern or build upon itself where you're not going all out in the beginning, you're gradually building into it. Those sort of sessions will go quite quickly for people. So I think the structure of the set can be really important there as well for helping people swim for that hour without getting bored or too exhausted halfway through it, and so on. So that's where I think we see some changes with people when they actually follow a good type of set rather than just swimming continuously for an hour, because I'd be afraid of that too right now with my fitness.
Absolutely. And to be honest, when talking about somebody in their let's say first year, even potentially first 2 years of triathlon, but at least the first year, at that point I'm not really worried about how long the sessions are. It's more about consistent and frequent swimming. So I would still like them to swim 3 times per week ideally, but if one of them is 30 minutes and the others are 45 minutes, then I would be perfectly okay with that at that stage of their career. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be beneficial for them to go longer, but when just getting into it, I would just prioritize, as long as you're consistent and you're swimming relatively frequently, that's fine, and we can increase the duration of the sessions a bit later on. But it's when you get to that sort of late beginner, early intermediate stage, and especially if you get stuck and stagnated, that's where I think that if you look at, okay, what is the problem? One of the potential problems is obviously some sort of technique issue, but then the other thing is that quite often it's just not enough total swimming in there for the reasons we mentioned before.
Yeah, totally agree. And like the big rocks that are going to move your swimming forwards, the main two I think are technique and the training and consistency. And then if you were to have a third in there, it's probably going to be your open water skills. That'd be the third one. So if you get those things right, then that's what's going to make a difference.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple more questions before the rapid fire ones. And well, I want to ask you about the kind of seasonal or even multi-year development arc for, let's say, somebody that is on the kind of, they want to go to Kona, or maybe they have already qualified for Kona. They want to get a good placement in Kona or 7.3 worlds or something like that. How do you think that they should approach the swim if that is their weakness and they feel that, or an Ironman swim, they swim an hour 15 and they want to swim 1 hour or something like that? At a 10,000 foot view or the course of a season or several seasons, what are some just tips or pieces of advice that you would give them?
Similar to what we talked about earlier, I would say, particularly for someone who's qualified for Kona or around that sort of level, video analysis would be the first thing. And it can be a challenge for some people to get, but there's ways to get it. And that is going to be the best thing that they could do for their swimming, to actually see what they're doing if they haven't done that before. Then just having that patience to develop their technique and not looking to rush the changes and not be too concerned with their speed, particularly in the early stages of their season. So the best time to work on your stroke is going to be at the start of the season. But that said, you can still improve it later on within the season, but we wouldn't want to be changing too much leading into like 1 or 2 months out from your A race that you've been training for perhaps half a year or the full year. So starting at the right time would be good as well. And then just making sure you get that check-in with your technique and how it's going, because it's you might have made those improvements and then it's time to focus on something else. Aside from that, having a coach just to work with or having a squad to swim with can be really beneficial as well. So if you're covering those sorts of bases, you're usually going to be looking pretty good with things. But over the course of 2, 3, 4 years, you can make some huge improvements in your swimming. Even short term, in 6 months, you can make some huge improvements in your swimming. And I did a podcast. I think it was the start of this year with a swimmer in Sydney, and she did a clinic with us might have been December, and she practiced things until sort of, I think it was Feb or March. So for 2 or 3 months, she was practicing, and her times weren't changing. And then all of a sudden it clicked, and she took 10 to 15 seconds off per 100 with her stroke. And then her race was about another, I think, a month out after that. So she started about 4 months out from her A race. So it all came together for her. And I think, for her, if she just didn't have belief that she could actually get better, she would have given up with those changes within a week or two. So as long as you just keep practicing and have faith that the right technique, the right changes can really make a difference, and you're patient with it, then those results can come. So that's kind of the approach I would take it for for an athlete at that level.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the thing with that example is that, well, she had some specific things that she was practicing. It isn't just about practice for practice's sake, like because of the clinic and everything. She had a few process goals in, these are the things that I'm working on, these are the things that I'm improving. So I think that's important, because you can, I think, especially with triathletes that have been in the game for several years, it's so easy to get stuck in a rut, and you keep swimming, you keep being consistent, but you stop improving at some point. And you just have to have those couple of goals that you're working on achieving, and that helps. That helps so much when you work towards something specific. I can break down your big goal, swimming faster in an Ironman or a half Ironman, to, well, what are the things that I need to improve in my technique, or what are the splits I need to achieve in the pool.
And it's not always going to be this upward trajectory. I think of it as like someone walking up a mountain. That's going to be the path that they want to take with the swimming getting better at the top of the mountain. But it's like you're the yo-yo with that person walking up it. So it's not going to be always good. You will have some times where maybe you plateau, maybe you get a little bit slower, but then you can continue improving. So that's the normal path for a lot of people. So to not get discouraged if they don't see improvements every single single time with it. So yeah, it's the way to go, and it's just patient. It makes a big difference, not only with actually making changes to it, but also just being with how you swim. Because when you do just sort of chill out and you're relaxed, you just move so much better. Sort of like we spoke about at the start, and you can see it with when people walk into the pool. You can see someone's attitude as well. Like as a coach, I sort of like to watch people as they come in and they get ready for the swim. You can see those swimmers that might be a bit nervous or they might be a little bit reserved, and that often comes out in their swimming. So sometimes I like to let the swimmers know, like, come into the pool like you own the place, like you are confident, like you know you can swim well, and that can transfer into your swimming. Because if you come in shoulders hunched over, head down, like I guarantee you're probably going to swim that way.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And then I want to ask you just a general question. What's one thing that you're currently learning about or are curious about or fascinated by, and why?
There's two things I'll go through quickly. One is a bit of strength training. I'm working with a gym here nearby and just going through a different type of strength training than I've done before. And I haven't done a whole lot with strength training, but I'm excited about seeing the results of this type of training. And the other one is just sort of exploring a bit of breath work and breath control and seeing how that helps my swimmers. So they're two things at the moment.
Perfect. And then let's roll into the rapid fire questions. So take just one sentence to answer each of these. And the first one is, what's your favorite book or resource related to swimming, triathlon, or endurance sports?
Well, I'd say Sheila Tiamina's book, Swim Speed Secrets, is probably one of the best ones that I've come across.
And what's an important habit that you've benefited from athletically, professionally, or personally?
Habit, getting up early.
And who's somebody that you look up to or that has inspired you?
I would say my dad, for his passion and ability to stay long term with things.
Awesome. And finally, Brenton, where can listeners find you on all the media, the internet? Just feel free to list everything. And also, if you have any projects or anything going on that you want to promote, now's a good time to do that.
Thank you. Effortlessswimming.com is our website, and all of our social media handles are at Effortless Swimming, so you'll find us there. And if you haven't seen any of the videos that we do before, YouTube's probably a good place to start. And in terms of what we've got coming up, so if you're a beginner, we've got a beginner freestyle course that I'm hopefully releasing in the next week or two for people who can't swim 400 continuously yet. And then also been in development with a swim paddle that will help swimmers improve their catch just with how it's designed. So I'm excited for that, and we're hoping to launch that on Kickstarter in February. So keep an eye out for that. It's I think it should be a good paddle for triathletes, and it's been a long time coming. So I'm excited for those couple of things coming up.
Yeah, that's exciting news. Thank you so much, Brenton. It's been great to catch up. Lots of great tips for improving your swimming. So really appreciate it, and hope to chat to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Michael. Appreciate it.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview with Brenton. I definitely enjoyed talking to him a lot and learned a lot, and looking forward to the next time. As always, you can find the show notes for this episode on scientifictriathlon.com with links to Brenton's or the Effortless Swimming website, YouTube, podcast, and Instagram. Also, the previous interview that I did with Brenton back in episode 18, if you want to go and listen to that. And remember that you can find all previous swimming-related episodes of that triathlon show by going to the podcast page and just filter for swimming. We have that as one of the categories, and you can just easily find all of the previous swimming episodes and interviews that we've done over there. I will link to that as well in the show notes. It's January now, and a lot of people are looking for training plans or coaching for their summer races. And if that's you, then definitely go and check out scientifictriathlon.com and the options that we have to offer there. And email me if you have any questions about either training plans or coaching. We have helped hundreds of athletes, and we would love to help you as well. Stay tuned to the podcast as well. Subscribe if you haven't already, because next Monday we have another interview coming out, and this one will be with Associate Professor Max Paquette on the topics such as quantifying training load in running, also ground surfaces and their relation to load and injury risk, and much, much more related to running and biomechanics and so on. It's a really good conversation, so I highly recommend you subscribe and tune in for that one. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration, that you can find on precisionfuelandhydration.com. Use their free online sweat test and quick carb calculator to understand your fluid, electrolyte, and carbohydrate needs and individualize your plan, and book a free video consultation with a team to refine your strategy. Use the code TTS22 at checkout for 15% off your first order of fueling and hydration products. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, and exceptional sunglasses and prescription glasses for everything from day-to-day wear to extreme action sports. Use the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS to get 20% off your entire Roka order. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.